and welcome back to Storytime with Alex. Reading Book 2 from Allbyon to Britannia, The Last Witch of Old Albion by Brandy Pearson. Right, where are we? We're on chapter 4. Ruth and Miles have agreed that they will go and visit the last witch of Old Albion. So, let's see what happens in chapter 4, Visiting Miss Cooper. But before I begin, I've not been sleeping well, so I've got tea I may have to sip, and we'll just see how this goes. That Sunday dinner was strange. Mum and Dad had met Ruth dozens of times at Miss P's house and had spoken to her quite reasonably, and not particularly long conversations. Over that meal, Mum had found a recipe for nut roast because Ruth was a vegetarian. They plied her with questions. Did she like the dinner? Did she like her new school? What were her hobbies and interests? When we moved on to my hobbies and interests, we had a long conversation about the Fortean times and unexplained phenomena, which was very strange, as we seemed to be up to our ears in strangeness. However, we did not spill the beans. I was too excited that I was about to meet a real witch and experience her magic. I thought of having one of those conversations where you try and talk about something while pretending it's happening to someone else, but I did not have the nerve. As soon as it was over, a huge trifle, the kind of thing my mum only ever made at Christmas. We said no to coffee and fled the house. As soon as we left, Ruth burst out laughing. "I'm sorry about my parents," I said. "They're acting oddly today." "Don't you get it?" Ruth said. "Your mum and dad think I'm your girlfriend now." "Really?" My alarm must have shown on my face. "Don't look so worried. You're not my type." She was still laughing. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or slightly insulted. I tried to see the positive side. "At least it won't look suspicious if we hang round together." She ruffled my hair, which made me blush, and she laughed even more. She was still laughing when we rang Miss P's doorbell. The door was answered by a priest in a black cassock. "Good afternoon. I'm Father Bennet. Miss Phillips asked me to let you in. I just came to bring her communion." I knew the vicar of Miss P's church, because he used to come into my old school, but I had never met this Father Bennet before. "I've just moved back into the area," he said, leading us into the dining room. "I'm retired and helping out the vicar when I can." Miss P was at the table in her wheelchair. Father Bennet began to clear away his communion set, a little round silver box, a silver crucifix, and 2 tiny silver candlesticks, and a cloth with lace edging. "They're so beautiful," said Ruth, "and that lace is so fine." "They are, aren't they?" he replied, packing them into a leather case that tied up with a cord. "I've had them a long time. I like to make sure they get used from time to time. I will take my leave, Miss Phillips, and continue to pray for your recovery." He gave her a little bow. "I'll let myself out." After he had gone, Miss P said, "Wasn't that a nice surprise?" The vicar phoned and said Father Bennet was coming. "I'm sure I've met him before somewhere. Must have been a long time ago. He said he's been up in Scotland for some years." "Anyway, we have more important things to deal with. I need to tell you about how to get to the cottage of Miss Rose Cooper, the last witch of Old Albion. Miles, do you remember Cooper's Yard? It's opposite my old school on the other side of the railway." There was a triangular yard between a section of disused railway and the overground line. There were some businesses there, a garage and a builder's that used the arches under the line. I'd only ever been there once when Dad was having the car fixed. Miss P told us there was also another foot tunnel back under the railway, but I'd never seen it. "That's because you were never looking, Miles. The tunnel leads through to Miss Cooper's garden and her cottage, but you will need sharp eyes and a couple of small spells to find her. And you will need this." She drew a chain that was around her neck under her cardigan. From it hung a circular silver disc engraved with a picture. She gave it to Ruth to put on. "This is very precious, and I trust you to take good care of it." The picture was a strange face made of leaves, with a leafy tongue sticking out, and more leaves sprouting from his nostrils. "It's a green man," said Ruth, "like the one on the cover of your stories folder." "It's an ancient symbol that means a lot to Miss Cooper. He's quite difficult to see amid all the leaves, so she says it helps to protect her from prying eyes. He's also about growing and spreading, which she says is about her magic. There's probably a lot more to him than that. What's important today is that this medallion will let you see what is there, starting with the way back under the railway. But you need to remember the spells too. I'm relying on you for that, Miles. If she lets you in, remember to be very polite." Remember that she's been in this world for a long time and knows more than you can imagine. Always call her Miss Cooper, tell her exactly what I told you, and give her this letter." We set off down Beacon Lane to the foot tunnel, with the silver-green man, the letter, and some spells to say. Did I believe we would really find a genuine witch, protected by magic, at the back of a yard opposite my old school? I found it difficult to believe, but I was also really excited to think that it might be true. It was strange standing on the pavement outside my old school, looking at the entrance to Cooper's yard. I remember that at school the teachers told us that it must have been named after people who made barrels, because they were called Coopers, but perhaps it was called after the witch, or perhaps the witch was called after the yard. We took a deep breath, crossed the road, and walked into the yard. There was a man in oily overalls looking into the engine of a car. We tried to look as though we belonged there, or were about important business, like when you're walking along the corridor at school when you should be in a lesson. He ignored us and started to tinker with the car engine. The buildings next to him were closed, with shutters across the archway, and next to that there was a smaller arch. We peered inside it. There were a few old paint pots and some rusty bits of metal strewn about, and a couple of cardboard boxes. At the back it seemed dark. I said the words of the first spell Miss P had taught me, and then we could see daylight at the other end. Had the spell actually done something? "Suddenly I'm nervous," said Ruth. "Come on," I said, trying to sound less nervous, and we walked up the tunnel. It came out into a tiny piece of land full of trees. It was very dense, and we could hear the traffic on the motorway on the other side. Miss P had told us to look for a hedge, and as we peered into the trees, I could make out a tall, untidy hedge with dark green needles and red berries. Miss P had told us it was a yew hedge. It was much taller than either of us, and there was no sign of a gate. Feeling stupid, I took a deep breath and spoke the second set of words that Miss P had told me, and we closed our eyes tight. When we opened them again, there was an arched hole in the hedge. That now seemed much more clipped, and a white wooden garden gate. "Wow," we both said in unison. I don't know about Ruth, but deep down I had not really believed any of this could be magical. A mad old lady living in a secret cottage I could handle. The magic was something else, and here it was. I felt a little sick, as if the world had lurched under my feet. Another deep breath, and I went to open the gate. Ow! It was red hot, and I quickly drew my hand away. "You forgot the third spell," Ruth whispered in my ear. "Drat!" I said the spell, and gingerly touched the gate again. This time it was just a wooden gate. I opened it, and we stepped through into the garden. The air in the garden prickled against my skin. "Can you feel that?" I whispered. "It must be magic," Ruth whispered back. I felt someone was watching us from behind the trees, and it was the sort of place where you had to whisper. The sound of the motorway was gone. If there were any trains on the line, we could not hear them. Most of the garden was full of bushes. There was a massive tree stump with a bird bath on top of it. The path was made of cobbles, great round stones that seemed to have been worn flat. I wondered how long she'd been there. Miss P said it was a very long time. The cottage itself was plain, with a slate roof and white walls. There was a wooden porch, painted green, and a red front door. This time I remembered to speak the fourth spell before touching the plain brass knocker. I took another deep breath and rapped on the door, wondering what we had got ourselves into. Silence. Miss P had warned of this. I knocked on the door again. "Go away!" said a voice loudly. It sounded as though she was standing on the other side of the door. There was a little glass panel with a swirl in it. Was she looking at us? Probably. We'd been warned of this too. Ruth held up the silver-green man, and I said, Miss Phillips told me to remind you that you are the last witch of old Allbyon, not an evil witch from a story by the Brothers Grimm." It sounded a bit rude to me, now that I was actually speaking the words out loud. I did not need to be reminded of evil witches at that moment. I could feel the hairs rising on the back of my neck. This was a place unlike anywhere I'd ever been, and a fair part of me just wanted to run away and pretend this had never happened. Ruth must have seen how I felt and took my hand, which was also alarming, but in a much nicer way. After a moment, laughter came, Not a cackling laugh like in a fairy tale, but a loud, happy laugh. The door opened. I thought she would be an old lady like Miss P. From what Miss P had said, she was very old, but she looked about the same age as my mum. She had long brown hair that was tied back in a ponytail with a green ribbon. She wore a long black skirt with a red border at the hem and a white blouse with a green cardigan with red buttons. In one hand she held a wooden spoon. "Well, this is intriguing," she said. "You know May Phillips and you know the right spells. I think I've seen you in the post office." She pointed the spoon at me. "But I don't know either of your names." I had suddenly become unable to speak. Was this a real witch? What did I think real witches looked like? Ruth spoke up. "My name is Ruth Mortimer, and this is Miles Burton. We're friends of Miss Phillips. She's broken her leg and cannot come to see you at the moment, but she asked us to give you this letter." She nudged me, and I held out the envelope. "Should I be excited or worried?" said the witch, taking the letter. "Well, I'm pleased to meet you, Miss Ruth Mortimer and Master Miles Burton. I am Mistress Rose Cooper, and I am the last witch of old Albion. Please come in and have a cup of tea with me." She ushered us into her cottage. I hope you drink tea. Young people today seem to have such a large choice of fizzy drinks and the like. "We would love a cup of tea," Ruth answered happily, and I followed her past Mistress Rose Cooper and into her cottage. "Come and sit down while I put on some water to boil. I was just about to make a cake, but that can wait for a little while." She indicated an old, round wooden table circled by 4 chairs that did not quite match each other. We sat down. At one end of the room there was an open fire with a metal shelf over one end of it. She filled a kettle from a strange kind of tap over a sink nearby, and placed it on the shelf. The kettle was black, but decorated with red roses and green leaves. It must have been hot there, because we could soon hear the water hissing and beginning to bubble. As you must imagine, I don't get many visitors, so I think this calls for the best tea set and a tablecloth. She took a white tablecloth embroidered around the edge with a pattern of green crosses from the drawer in her dresser and spread it on the table, then a white teapot covered in green polka dots from the dresser shelves above, and 3 matching cups and saucers. She rummaged in the cupboard beneath and took out a cake tin. "I don't have any cake left, but I have these biscuits I made yesterday." She opened the tin and filled a plate with cookies. I was mesmerised. Finally the tea was made and poured, and we sat at the table nibbling the cookies as Miss Cooper took a pair of glasses from her cardigan pocket and opened the letter to read it. She read in... Oh, do you know, wait. Tea. Tea break. Talk among yourselves. Oh, yeah. Professional. She read in silence as we looked around her cottage. It was very clean and tidy, but everything in it was old and well used. The walls were white, with a stenciled pattern in red and green at the top. The floor was covered in red tiles, with rugs made of scraps of fabric in bright colours, but mainly green and red and black. We knew from the stories we'd been told that these were the colours of the witches of old Albion: green for trees and plants, red for life and health, and black for the laying out of the dead. Ruth had always been particularly fond of repeating that, though she seemed to prefer the black in her own outfits at the moment. There was the front door on one side, and what seemed to be the back door on the other, with a pair of green Wellington boots standing next to it, and a bucket of something that looked like seeds. There was another door in the wall opposite the fire, which I assumed must go to a bedroom. Was there a bathroom or a loo? It seemed so old that there might not be. I tried to take everything in, to observe everything carefully. There were beams across the ceiling, with strings of onions and bunches of herbs and stuff hanging from them. I could not believe that this place existed between the railway and the motorway in West London. Eventually she looked up. "So," she said, "6 missing cats, all descended from a cat that appeared about 12 years ago. Do you know what time of year that cat appeared?" She looked at me with sharp and lively eyes. "No," I stammered. "Could you find out?" "I could ask Mr. Jackson. He told me about Gloriana. He might know." "Good. Now tell me about May's leg." It took me a moment to realise she was talking about Miss P. I told her all I knew. The piece of fishing line was still in my pocket, so I showed it to her. She took it in her hand and sat quietly for a moment with her eyes closed. She opened them again suddenly and threw the line onto the table. Definitely deliberate and certainly malicious. Whoever did this meant her harm. Oh dear. Can I ask you another question? Has Miss Phillips been visited by a priest recently? Not her vicar, but someone new to her? Yes, she has, I said in surprise. A priest called Father Bennet brought her communion this morning. Helping out at her church? Yes, I think so. Father Bennet. Good name. But she said no more about him. Then she took off her glasses and looked at us. It was not an unfriendly look, but it seemed to go inside my head and made me worry about what bad things she might find there. Eventually she said, Miss Phillips seems to have appointed you her deputies, and you have done what she asked of you without really knowing much of what is going on. So I think it is only right that I trust you, as she does, and tell you at least something of the mystery of the Allbyon Triangle. Is there more of a mystery than you? Ruth asked. Oh yes, my dear, a lot more. Have another biscuit, and I'll have some more tea, while I think about what to tell you first. Yes, always more tea. As I nibbled the tasty biscuit, I watched her as she made the tea. Could she really be very old? It would not be polite to ask, and that was only one of the questions I wanted to ask her. After the tea was poured, Rose Cooper sat down. I need to explain the significance of the cats, so that is where I will start. In my mind, I set aside my questions and did my best to pay attention. Have you ever noticed that cats like open doors? She said. They don't necessarily want to be in the room or the garden or whatever is on the other side of the door. They like doors to be open, and they like to know that they can go through them if they want to. This does not just apply to the doors in our houses, but to more metaphysical or magical doors and doorways. Are you with me? We nodded vigorously, though I'm not sure we were. I vaguely remembered a story with a cat who kept a magical gateway open. Rose Cooper offered us each another biscuit, took a deep breath and continued. I'm sure you know the gardens in the middle of Allbyon Triangle. What you will not know is that there is sometimes something there that you might describe as a doorway. There is a thin place between this world and somewhere else. Once a year, this place is so thin that it becomes a way through from one place to the other, a door, a gate, maybe a bridge. I've been playing there since I was 4, I said in amazement. I've never seen anything strange in there at all. Well, Master Miles, you never saw the way through to my cottage either, did you? Some things are not as easy to see unless you're looking, or maybe if you're a cat. The creatures that can see what's there when it's there and pass through it most easily are cats, but not just any cats. Over the years, cats have been known to come from the other place into this place, and those are the cats who find it easier to pass back through in the opposite direction, and so do their descendants. So maybe you can understand why I'm interested in the cats of Allbyon Triangle. We nodded. I know some of the residents of the Triangle believe Miss Phillips to be a witch, but you know she is not. But she is important to the Triangle because she's a warden. Like a prison warden? Ruth asked. Rose chuckled. Not quite. A warden is someone who guards, takes care of, a guardian. She's not so much of my guardian. After all this time I can look after myself. But a warden of this thin place at the centre of Allbyon Triangle. From time to time, despite best efforts, foolish people have found out about the thin place. Foolish people are often also nosy and sometimes decided that they want to pass through to the other place. They get full of romantic notions of what might be on the other side, a world of magic, the world of old Albion, where all their dreams can come true. She shook her head. Cats are necessary to attempt to find a way through, make the bridge stronger or the doorway bigger, if you like. I've made it a policy not to know too much of the mechanics of such attempts, and it is a long time since I took any interest in trying it myself. I rather hoped that no one else would find out about it. But just in case, I asked Miss P and the wardens who came before her to be on the lookout for such cats, and anyone who seemed to be gathering cats together. Why are you so worried about this? Don't you want people to get through to this other place if they want? It sounds exciting, I said. Rose Cooper laughed. I sometimes forget how old I am. I forget how curious people are, always wanting to boldly go where no one has gone before and all that Star Trek stuff. She saw the surprises on our faces. Oh, yes, I do watch television from time to time. It's important to know the stories people are telling. I suppose if I told you that no one actually knows what is on the other side of the doorway, that would not necessarily put you off. Not necessarily, said Ruth. If old Albion is on the other side, it might be worth the risk. From what you've told us, there are cats there. It would be a great adventure. Miss Mortimer, I understand the desire for adventure. I am very fond of cats myself, and I would not wish to spoil people's fun. But this thin place, this occasional doorway or bridge is not supposed to be there. It's the result of a terrible thing that happened, the result of human pride and folly. Cats can slip through from time to time without making much difference, though I do wonder how many cats down through the years it would take to make the crack worse. A human being going across the bridge, would cause a disaster, not just because they are bigger than cats, but because they're different. They think in a different way from cats. They have different stories. A human being caused this terrible thing in the first place. It could have destroyed the whole of creation, but it was halted by another human being. There was a power that prevented it being even worse, a power far beyond us, but it was not able to make it so that it never happened. It was as if you had a beautiful porcelain jug and someone broke it. Someone else stopped it being smashed into dust and glued it back together, but it would never be the same, and it would not take much to break it again. What happened to make this thin place? What power stopped it, and how come you're here? I asked, completely fascinated. I managed not to ask her how old she was. Ah, Master Miles Burton. Those are large questions that deserve good answers. She patted my arm. They deserve the telling of a tale I never wrote down, because even after all this time, it makes me so sad, so angry. But that will have to wait for another occasion, in the sunlight, perhaps over a comforting meal. I believe you both need a little time to take in what has happened to you today, and what I have already told you. When you go back to your homes, this might seem to be a dream or a fantasy, and I need you to be certain that it is real and how important it is to find out more about the missing cats. I wanted to say that I would never think this was a dream, but I looked around her cottage, somewhere between the railway and the motorway, and was not so sure. Firstly, said Miss Cooper, if you can, find out when the cat called Gloriana first appeared in the triangle. Secondly, if you can, find out who has taken the cats. But if you do not confront them. Tell Miss Phillips or come and tell me, for they may be dangerous. Thirdly, try to find where the cats are being kept. Again, be careful. And fourthly, keep all of this to yourselves. Miss Phillips says in her letter that you can be trusted to keep a secret. Master Miles, I'm sure you've been itching to ask me how old I am. I stammered a denial, then more sensibly admitted that I had. Well, I am nearly 383 years old, Master Miles, though I don't look it, you must admit. I nodded and felt myself blushing. I have survived here for nearly 348 years, partly through magic, partly through the help of friends, but mainly, I believe, through secrecy. We'll keep your secret, we promise, we both said. In my mind, I was trying not to focus on the 383 and the 348 years, but I think we both understood how important this was, especially to Rose Cooper, but it felt strange to make such a promise. Now time is passing, she said. The clocks have just gone back, and it's beginning to get dark. I don't want you getting into trouble with your parents, so perhaps it's time for you to drink up your tea and go home. We finished our tea, and I ate another biscuit. I feel like this turned into a drinking game. It's like, whenever they mention tea, you must drink. As we were getting up to leave, Miss Cooper said, I suppose you're at school all day, aren't you? Perhaps you could come and see me next Saturday. Would you like to come for lunch? Will you have to ask your parents? My mum won't mind if I say I'm having lunch with Miles, said Ruth excitedly. She looked so excited that I would have felt very mean saying no. As long as I've done my homework, I suppose, I said. We could say we were going out to lunch together, having a burger or something down on the high street. That would only be a bit of a lie. I'm sorry you have to tell even a tiny part of a lie, Master Miles, but thank you. She nodded to me. Can I expect you at 1 o'clock? We probably can, said Ruth, can't we? I promise you better food than beef burgers, said Rose Cooper, and was not worried that Mum and Dad would not let me go. And I was worried that they would definitely think that Ruth was now my girlfriend. That week I found out of several interesting things. The first, which was nothing to do with magic and witches, was how much my parents worried about me being an only child with no friends. They were positively delighted that I was going out for lunch with Ruth, and kept saying I was going on a date until I stopped them. The second thing was that Rose Cooper was quite right. It was difficult to believe what had happened to us that Sunday afternoon, when I was finding my school shoes and going to lessons and playing football in the playground. Every afternoon after school I would go round to Miss P's cottage and talk to her about it. She was impressed that Rose Cooper had told us how old she was. One afternoon, when she had got out of school early, Ruth turned up as well on... Oh, God. Hold on. See, it's a long chapter. Okay. One afternoon, when she had got out of her school early, Ruth turned up as well on Tuesday, also needing to talk to someone who knew it to be true, and we spent ages just going over what had happened on that Sunday afternoon. The third thing I discovered was more information about Gloriana. I went around to Mr. Jackson's house and told him I was doing a school project on local history, so that I could ask him more about Gloriana. He was so happy to be asked that he asked me in and gave me a can of Coke. From him I learned that Gloriana had appeared a couple of days after Christmas. He remembered because Mr. Benson used to call her his surprise Christmas present. When he retired, he'd moved away from the Triangle because his house went with his job as a caretaker, and he took Gloriana with him. I wrote all this down in my notebook, feeling quite pleased with myself. On Wednesday, another poster appeared, stapled to the trees down Albury Road. It was about a cat called Truffle, who was a mottled dark brown. She came from halfway down Everlast Road. When I told Miss P that afternoon, she looked a little more alarmed. You can fit her on the family tree, Miles. I know her mother, my gremlin. Finding all this out all helped the week to go by. I was so looking forward to visiting Rose Cooper again that otherwise the days passed very slowly. Miss P seemed to be coping well with her broken leg, but was given a pair of crutches to help her around and exercise the leg that wasn't broken. She was very relieved that Rose Cooper had been so welcoming and was willing to tell us more. It's been very difficult keeping such a huge secret to myself all these years. It'll be good to be able to share it with Ruth and you. I hope you do not find it a burden. Of course not, I said, but I could feel the weight of the secret. It made me feel very grown up and important, but I could imagine it weighing down on me. On the following Saturday, we returned to Rose Cooper's cottage, and I told her what I had learned, including the disappearance of Truffle and her relationship with Gremlin. We had a splendid lunch, a sort of spicy mushroom stew with dumplings, and afterwards, while we picked at a bowl of hazelnuts dipped in caramel, Miss Rose Cooper, the last witch of old Allbyon, told us a story. And if you want to hear that story, you'll have to come back next time. Thank you.